begin our scene with a most blustery bluster. The wind gusts its guster. Just had to add that bit of drama into my offering. Here we are. Woo! Technical difficulties. Extreme location filming. Okay, sure. We're good. We can work with this. Of course we can. As you all know, I'm extremely technical. So, all will be explained, or you will think me deranged. Either way, I've arranged it that way. Feeling pretty like greasy haired, a little bit like devil may care, a little crazy, but that fits with what I'm doing. So what I'm presenting to you is a really crazy dream I had a few nights back, and it just attacked all my senses, and you'll get a feel for what it is like to dream as Teal, because what I can say about this dream is that what I wrote down is really just a fraction of what I actually remember from the dream. The packed action. Just a fraction. And I often have 5 to 10 memorable dreams like this a night. And when I dream journal, as I did with this particular piece of synapses being released, the more I write about my dreams, the more I remember. And it's an exercise that really works, but you got to be careful with it. Because like back in high school, I was remembering so many different worlds, I could barely live in this one. It was just too much in my brain. So, in the dream, I was me, but in a totally different set of circumstances. And I guess I'll backtrack on some of it and try to explain more of it as we get through it. But in the dream, I was always wearing some various version of really weird, bad, late 80s, early 90s denim. So I pulled this baddie from the basement, and this is the kind of thing I was always dressed in the dream, some variation of this. So who knows why that part exists, but let us delve. And this bed, this is my mother's bed, and it was okay. I will say that I really wished all day, I was like racking my brain, like who do I know with an amazingly awesome house that has the crazy epic staircase or like really old stone features or something of that variety. And it's like I can kind of think of people, but people are always kind of busy or boring or running off to dentist appointments, you know? Like, people don't really make plans these days anymore anyway, but like, hey, can I come do this really disturbing dream reading in your like epic rich person staircase? Is that okay? Not really a question that you feel bold enough to ask most times. So this reminded me slightly, along with a feature that will be revealed, of one of the bedrooms in this dream, but only slightly. I wish I had like big, huge, creepy house to work with, but I don't. So we'll just use your imaginations. So here we go. This dream I call Escaping the Horrible Portals Mansion. I shall attempt to recount as many details as I can fit into a reasonable length video of my dream a few nights past. You would be aghast if you were to actually comb through all the details I remember of it. My extreme dream retention is fitting of my personality, very over the top. I'll summarize the insane occurrences of this far-off place, hidden behind a curtain in my brain, as a sort of horror movie collection of various things I settled for watching on Netflix out of boredom / mishmash of my subconscious / nail-biter of a thriller including killer drug dealers and cannibal animals. You're following. It's hard to get a handle on exactly where all of this madness comes from, but I'll make a run at it. An interesting feature of the dream was that I didn't know or necessarily recognize anyone in it. They say that you cannot create new faces in your dreams, so I struggled to connect the threads of who all these characters were that made me feel anxiety and fear and dread. I'll try to be as articulate as I can as I unleash the complex details. The dream began in a huge, dilapidated Victorian mansion, surrounded by swamps and thick forests leading to God knows where. The air was a thick orange haze of murky fog. The general atmosphere itself seemed to clog your pores and force anyone to feel stuck where they were. This particular version of my dream self knew a lot of information going into the scenes of the dream. In other words, there was a lot of backstory I was already in on. I knew that this small town was full of criminals, or people who once started out as good but withstood so much torment that their resentment of the place eventually made them turn to unsavory activities. Everyone I encountered seemed to have a proclivity towards the worst version of themselves, and had long ago shelved their impulse control. I was no exception to this societal rejection, and in my mind I knew I was in too deep, and could no longer see my feet in the murk I had waded into unwittingly. The man in control was a small troll-like fellow, a drug dealer, a smirking, ever-lurking, unmistakably evil dude who sold drugs along with a variety of lackeys who helped him to build his dingy empire. The most notable and most often visited feature of the mansion was a giant staircase that somewhat resembled the one in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, only it was a fair bit more run down, crumbling in the center as though it was just about to cave in. A sort of smoke clung to everything, and though you cannot feel in a dream per se, I knew my eyes were always irritated. I concentrated every moment on how to escape this place, while putting on a good show simultaneously to prove that I was loyal and always available for this ragtag family. The man in charge, a large-bellied, fat-faced kingpin of the operation, was, I suppose, an amalgamation of various bullies and losers from my past. He was a compilation of mean boys in class and assholes from bars where I worked in my waking world reality. It seemed I lived for months in the dream, though maybe it was only a few minutes. I had been pushed beyond my limits and caught a glimpse of myself in a hallway mirror, noticing that my face was gaunt, and my very spirit seemed haunted by the atrocities I'd seen in this house. The leader's right-hand man was an absolute dirty, rotten louse. He was very tall, thin, gangly, one might say. He looked a bit like the skinny pirate sidekick in Pirates of the Caribbean, but even more weathered, leathery, barely able to hold his heavy, drug-addicted eyelids up. He never spoke, but always laughed when people were in pain. A cold and misty rain seemed always to be falling around the property. A whole host of strange and creepy characters crashed sloppily in all of the rooms. There was a layer of doom over everything. I knew secrets about the house, indicating that perhaps I'd been there for a long time. A few stood out in my mind when I woke from the dream. For example, there was a large library, once resplendent and sophisticated by the looks of what was left of the rotting wallpaper and splintering sconces. Our deviant leader used it as his business operations center. He'd go on a bender of substances and put on his silky wannabe Hugh Hefner robe. He would light a long wooden pipe filled with who knows what, blast classical music like Beethoven as though he was some sort of great lord of a successful manor. He would break glasses and clamor around the room, yelling orders whether or not anyone was there to hear them. The secret of this room was that the safe, which used to contain precious jewelry or land deeds, now contained a portal that led to a dimension so addictive that he had to guard it with a shotgun because it was so tempting to everyone who lived in the house to abuse the effects of this odd place. I myself had tasted its bizarre appeal. I came back from the portal reeling, unable to deal with the drug, sweat-soaked reality I was forced to return to. It was difficult to put the atmosphere of the portal into words. The boss, aka the short, fat, bloated pig who ruled over us, took notes on everyone's observances of this particular portal. His handwriting was barely decipherable, but he took it all very seriously. He became more and more deliriously unhinged because he'd used the portal more than any of us. He claimed it was dangerous to use it more than twice a year, but I saw him entering it almost nightly. The one residual effect of visiting that indescribable place that I was sure of was that it seemed to enhance the individual's perceived power, and the feeling would not fade upon return. You could see the high burning in people's eyes when they came back. The lack of control they had in reality became that much more unbearable. The other strange feature of this alternate world hidden in our drug palace was its electromagnetic quality. Only one person at a time could enter this space, and when they did, all the hairs on their body stood up. One unfortunate result of visiting this land too often was that it seemed to soften the skin, not in a textural way, but in the sense that you would become more and more sensitive to touch every time. Because of this, our always yelling, always pissed off commander became enraged when anyone came close to him, even several feet away. If anyone accidentally brushed him or, heaven forbid, bumped into him, they prayed he would go easy on them, but they knew he would not. There were at least 3 bodies I knew of in the cellar. This was just part of our daily lives. Dealers and buyers came and went, and if our egomaniacal dictator got bent out of shape, you would never see that person again. It was known commonly among the people dwelling in the house that he even killed a few of his friends. The windows talked in this house, and I don't mean in the metaphorical way where the wood swelled and it sounded like they were talking. I mean they actually spoke. One window in an upstairs bedroom was my only ally in the house. This window with its tattered lace curtains was certain that I did not belong in this horrible place and tried to give me advice to help me get out. This was a big risk, of course. The house itself and the furniture in it was not safe from the wrath of our daft leader. The furniture also spoke, but telepathically, not out loud. There was a girl in the house I sort of considered a friend, only in so much as I didn't hate her as much as the others. She once ratted out an armoire that had been telepathically communicating to one of the drug dealers about places he could go to school. Bettering ourselves was against the rules. Our squatty boss took no time hesitating to toss that armoire into a giant fire in the front yard. It was beyond hard to fake my devotion to this horrible man, but I had no other choice and no real solid plan. A portion of the dream fixated on me trying to rationalize with the girl who got the armoire burned alive. She was driving to some far out... She was jiving... Sorry, voice to text. My wrists are wrecked, so I tried to voice to text. It's hard. She was the one who got the armoire burned alive. She was jiving to some far out record, dancing around her empty room, holding a broom but not really sweeping, and weeping in a seemingly happy way about this ugly fur coat the boss had got for her. The building adjacent to the mansion was a gas station in the 1950s. Now it was a ramshackle store where a skeletal former biker gang leader sold dirty vintage clothing, bric-a-brac, scratched records, and knickknacks such as armadillo ukuleles and puka shell necklaces. He had formed a "you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours" relationship with our jailer. The motorcycle man who looked like the crypt keeper was in love with this stupid girl dancing in front of me. He would give his drug-snorting cohort whatever sorts of treasures he wanted at a great discount, and in exchange asked him to hand-deliver ugly gifts to this sad girl, hoping it would amount to some sort of romance. She let him think he had a chance because she knew that increased her likelihood of survival. She and I were part teammates, part rivals. The arrival of other women in the house made us both nervous. Being some of the only females, as you can imagine, elicited some very pervish advances. She continued her silly dance as I pleaded with her to see reason. I stared out the window knowing I wasn't getting through to her. I didn't even know what season it was anymore. I felt sad for her. Looking to score with one of these bottom feeders was her version of theater, of entertainment, and likely the most she could hope to look forward to. The expression on her face was a mixture of being too wasted to care, despair, and not having a clue. She chased little alliances and short-lived romances with many of the men in the house. When they came around, she was quiet as a mouse, and as soon as they walked away, she cackled like a banshee and brayed like a mule. She only kept it cool when the boss's informants and guards were watching.
She shifted gears quickly, going into a coughing fit, hitting her chest in an attempt to loosen whatever drug stew phlegm was building in her lungs. She flung her limbs around to the music, crying either out of sadness or madness as her makeup smeared down her face. She had replaced every decent thing about herself with garbage and obedience in this horrible place. Her expressions contorted like a person on a roller coaster that couldn't get off. On a roller coaster they couldn't get off of. She'd never been loved for a moment in her whole life. "Do you like it here or something?" I found myself barking at her angrily. She stopped her prancing around momentarily. She actually considered the question, which surprised me. "We all choose to love what we hate so that we can survive it, don't we?" She spat back at me. It may have been the only intelligent thing I ever heard her say. I reflect on her image now, the slightly red hair with the tips dyed black, and I imagine she was a combination of women in my life I constantly tried to save from their defaulting to self-inflicted chemical and mental strife. She contained layers of women I knew who were perpetually landed in the gutter and frequently expected me to show up to pull them out of it. The sad bit is that I have so many of those real-life examples to draw from. She represented so many women I know who couldn't recall a single gentle touch. Much of the dream was snippets of chaos. A group of low on the totem pole fools lost their cool on a beautiful old piano in one of the great halls. They stripped that thing down to splinters. It was one of the only lovely things left around us. One very hellish scene stands out. Someone in the group was asking for more food. Our easily agitated boss man found that rude. "Do you want to live like the animals here do?" he asked the man menacingly. The poor sap immediately began to plead, knowing that he had just sealed his own fate. There was a gate at the edge of the property. It contained a variety of animals. Mr. Napoleon Complex, who ruled us all, neglected them to the point of torture. He never fed them, instead insisting that it was an experiment to see which animals would eat the other animals. His sick plan worked, of course, and I don't even want to tell you how the horses stayed alive. There were pigs who ate other pigs, and so on and so forth down the food chain. You'd stroll through the field and find a bit of an ear or a bit of brain. Sending a human out to the animal pen was an immediate death sentence. The defenseless man knew that's where he was headed to. We heard his screams, and the fiend who sent him out there stood with a brandy in the window laughing. His greasy hair jiggled as he giggled like a schoolboy. The torment of others always brought him joy. The next morning everyone seemed fed up. No one was saying anything as per usual, but you could feel the anger coursing through everyone's veins, mixed in some cases with a cocktail of mentally going off the rails and drugs. The thugs who dominated our every move were clearly on edge. Our gluttonous chief in command came bounding down the creaking stairs. "Time to get your affairs in order, you parasites," he screamed at all of us. "We're being sued by that scrawny fuck at the mercantile next door. Get ready for the shitstorm," he yelled as he threw papers in the air before slamming the door to the library, containing the house's most powerful portal. Though not its only one. We were all dumbstruck. I read the contents of the paperwork, which of course in hindsight were written as indecipherable symbols, as writing in dreams often appears as nonsense. It made sense to my dream self, however. The letter detailed a $5 million lawsuit alleging that the Big Cheese, our sleazy boss, was supposed to have been paying rent for the last 10 years and hadn't given old Skin and Bones a dime. He must have really pissed the guy off this time. They had been doing business together for decades and would sort of trade places, having sway over each other. One of them would always be weaker than the other until they miraculously recovered and took over the power, switching back and forth like that sometimes, hour by hour. Something had obviously gone horribly wrong in some deal or trade or long game between them. The only thing I collected definitively from the legal paperwork was that it was time to get the fuck out of there. I could tell by the demeanor of our leader that he would be using the portal tonight as an escape. I forgot to mention the entryway was only agape after sunset. It was a safe bet that he would be looking for some sort of distraction. The others who lived in the house only knew a fraction of his wheelings and dealings in the corrupt community beyond the walls of the estate. Everyone he interacted with either had a target on their back or acquired immunity to his attacks. There was no middle ground around here. My fear was mounting by the moment, but my sense of urgency was even greater. I went to that sad lost girl's room, deciding in a hasty moment that I didn't hate her, but instead wanted to save her. As I went into her den of whatever the opposite of Zen is, the sound around me was being turned up and down as though God was using some fader on a soundboard. I was practically screaming at her, and she ignored me. I picked up a test tube-looking bottle from her nightstand, which glowed lime green in my hand. I recognized it as a new drug we'd been pushing. No wonder she was smushing the full weight of her face against the wall and seemed to be crawling out of her own skin. There was no saving this poor soul. Her hold on sanity had been worn too thin. Somehow, in that way that the plot gets elevated in dreams without you noticing, I had acquired the master set of keys. I shut the door slowly and locked her in, knowing that very bad things were about to begin. She'd be safer behind that door than wandering around that giant house waiting for what was in store. I was shaken to my core as I looked through the window and noticed that 3 of my fellow prisoners had been scattered to the animal anarchy outside. I had to act. There was no time to hide. I devised a plan. I fried up some Spam, the boss's favorite, knowing that he would smell it and come to investigate. He peered his pimply, swollen head around the corner in the kitchen. Is that Spam I smell?" he asked. I nodded yes, smiling like an obedient 50s housewife. "My favorite," he beamed at me, though devilishly. "I know it's been a terrible day for you," I said soothingly, trying to get inside his head. "I thought you could use a snack." He smacked his lips together and rubbed his calloused hands eagerly, making the sound of sandpaper rubbing across sandpaper. "Don't you know you gotta get your affairs in order, like I said, with all these legal eagles surrounding the place?" he asked me, studying my face, suspicious of me. "Well, that can wait for later," I replied without hesitation, as though all my energy and concentration was focused on him and his happiness. He clapped his pudgy hands and grabbed the pan from me. Unconcerned about whether the heat would burn him, he just dug in with his sausage fingers. The smell of Spam lingered in the long hallways for hours. I had put a sleeping pill in the Spam and calmly carried his sorry excuse for a man into his precious library. I placed his bottles of bathtub gin all around him so that when he awoke, he would think he spoke to me in some sort of a dream. I knew that as soon as he saw the sun had set, he would get right into that portal, trying to make himself immortal with power or whatever he was after in there. The one thing I knew for sure was that he didn't care about any of us, and he wouldn't be wasting his precious energy, his precious drug-dealing time, to make a fuss coming into the house to check on anyone. The hard part was done. Or was it? For whatever inexplicable reason, my dream self suddenly felt compelled to say goodbye to the established matriarch of this misfit crew. She resided in one of the smallish upstairs bedrooms. She dressed opulently, and it was well understood amongst the prisoners there that she was likely a ghost whom everyone was able to see for some reason or another. She was a sort of den mother to us, or should I say the only person in the massive house who gave an ounce of empathy to any of the poor souls wandering travelers who found themselves stuck there as indentured drug pushers and never escaped. She would traipse through the halls, always dressed in Victorian fineries, racing about as though she was late for some ball. She took time to pop her head into all of our bedrooms or corners stacked with pillows, fruit cellars, or crawl spaces, as was the case for some, to give a smile and check on us, energetically at least. She would sometimes use a sort of spell and give the illusion of a great feast with all the pomp and circumstance, and dance about the table happily, knowing full well none of us could eat the superimposed paranormal spread, and dreaded terribly whatever it was we would be forced to eat instead. The people who found themselves stuck at the mansion all fell into a sort of unspoken hierarchy. The reasons that some people slept in closets and others, like my idiot friend in the fur coat, had their own rooms, were reasons understood among us via mob mentality, but not known with any kind of specificity. We could only guess at the list of criteria required to have a pillow versus whatever wrongdoing caused someone else to be relegated to the floor. At our cores, we of course knew this was wrong, that some in the house were given Twinkies or pork rinds or other such treasures, while others who endeavored to speak up or give their 2 cents were thrown over the fence to the starving rabid animals. But wrong or right, every day and every night we all did whatever we could to gain favor there. We did what was required of us and never dared to raise our voice or cuss in the presence of our vertically challenged commander. Back to the ghost woman. "Back to the ghost woman," she said as her phone crashed the video and stopped recording because of planned obsolescence and the absolute continual need to buy new phones and technology. we'll either find a way to fuse these together because my mom's gone and so I don't have her computer, or we'll release 2 videos and it'll just be a blast and we'll just keep going. Because we're going, y'all. We're going 365 no matter what. So where were we? Holy crap. If you're starting on this video, go back to the other one. If I've released 2 videos, or if I've miraculously found a way to fuse them together, then just keep up with the action, people. Here we go. We did what was required of us and never dared to raise our voice or cuss in the presence of our vertically challenged commander. Back to the ghost woman. The closest thing any of us had to a mother. I wanted her to love me. I wanted to understand her. She had never meant as much to me as she did in the moment I was compelled to make my getaway. I clasped the banister of the disintegrating staircase, wondering if for once she would say something to me. If I was leaving, would she hold me close to her and wish me well? A panic fell over me. I sweated profusely. I slowly ascended the stairs, being very, very aware of each creak and groan of the wood beneath me. It was not altogether unlikely that the slightest misstep could wake that odious beast, the man who never intended to release any of us back to a life worth living, and my plans would be ruined. If I woke him, he'd most certainly be delivering me to the animal pen to fend for myself. And it goes without saying, that scenario would not end well for me. The swelling and shrinking of the floorboards seemed louder than ever before, but I just had to reach the ghost woman's door and implore her to miss me in some way. Finally, I got to her room. My palm slid off the antique door handle because it was so wet with stress sweat. The sound of me grabbing for it caused her to fling the door open telepathically, as she often did. She pulled me towards her with her mind, and I slid across the maple syrup-colored oak floor until I was standing directly before her. She sized me up. I was well aware that she could read our thoughts when she was close to us. I knew it was risky to say goodbye to her, but some pure connection I couldn't explain drove me to look past all the pain I was in and try anyway. Looking back on it now, perhaps it was a distraction tactic, but she began wildly flinging her complex, hand-sewn Victorian garments made of luscious fabrics all around the room. She did the same old act, as though she was very late for a prestigious ball or gathering. With tight precision, she flicked her wrists, telekinetically sliding all the closets open and closed at once. She hunted for the perfect gown as I stared at the ground, regretting my decision to include her in my exit. She already knew why I was there, and still I couldn't bear to walk out of the room without a proper farewell. I knew she was reading my thoughts like a book, and still I took the time to tell her in words how and why I was leaving. She continued her act, digging through piles of corsets and bustles before spinning her head around separate from her body, her face seething with anger. I was no stranger to this kind of expression, and it was clearly a misstep to give her my confession. Instinctually, I bolted for the doorway just in time as she flung the door closed with a flick of her finger. I was flying down the stairs, it seemed. Not knowing it was a dream in that moment, my levitating off the staircase seemed surprising at the time. Was she helping me, I wondered? Did she know that the walls had eyes, and she had to act surprised by my departure, but actually wanted to assist me with it? I couldn't worry about that now. I just allowed it to happen. I had prepared myself with double layers of leather gloves, knowing that the big cheese kept the front door handle heated to over 200 degrees, so no one would ever be tempted to flee. As I reached for it, I could taste the air far away from there and felt certain my plan was working. Out of nowhere, a skinny girl appeared from behind an old hall tree covered in dirty hats in the foyer. Her hands were clasped as if she was praying. "Please," she whispered to me desperately, "please help me so I too can get away." The madam, she explained to me, gesturing towards the ghost woman upstairs. "She taught me to read minds, and I've been reading yours for a while. I know you have a good plan. Take me with you, please." She would have groveled on her knees if I asked her to. There was no time to waste. I feared she would drag me down, but I couldn't say no to her. I was so consumed with fear that I couldn't be sure, but I thought I heard the boss man stirring in his study. The rest of the action was muddy in my mind because it's a dream, so it's hard to define. Like a very scary movie, but even more intensified. The skinny girl and I ran past the ravenous animals, running like machines until our lungs felt like glass shards, through the swampland. She held my hand like a sweet child with no one to guide her. I couldn't deny her a chance to get out of there. The further we made it into the woods, into the smoky gray air of the unknown night, the more I had to fight to convince myself that my plan was a good one. Once you get yourself on the run, it becomes a perpetual state of being. I kept seeing monsters hidden in the trees and shadows, and as the frightened girl clutched me close, I fought to pretend I was the brave one between us. Every rustle of the bushes pushed me like an invisible hand forward across the span of uninviting bleakness that seemed to feed on our weakness and go on indefinitely through the trees. Suddenly I heard the boss's bloodhounds barking and could see the sparking of torches from a mile or so behind us. I felt like we'd gotten so far, like the stars were illuminating a path to our beautiful escape. But there was still so much at stake, including both our lives. We weren't get out of the woods, as they say. We heard glass breaking, surely a result of our murderous ruler waking up to find us gone. No one had ever made it out of that terrible place and survived long. The frail girl, who likely hadn't been fed properly in weeks, started to hum a little song. It should have scared me that she could draw them right to us, but instead it hushed the pounding terror in my mind. We could scarcely find the path through the twisting thorns and dark mud, and we inched along until we heard a thud. We both thought we were done for and spun around to see. An old tree had fallen, barely missing our heads. We fed on the adrenaline of being startled and marveled at our impressive pace. We made it miles before we both spotted a face in the trees. Hopelessness seized us both as we assumed that it was one of the little drug troll's henchmen. I mentioned no one had made it out and lived, or at least that's what we were told. The face jumped down, revealing a whole person. I wasn't certain at first, but instead of running, I leaned in and saw it was a former prisoner of the mansion. A young man with a kind face and missing front teeth who always brought the boss his evening tea until one night he displeased the leader in some way. The tyrant's response was to toss the scalding tea into the boy's face. We were told he was chased off the premises, and his body was later found near the marsh. But here he was, alone, but alive in the dark. There was a tiny spark of joy in his eyes, which surprised me because I hadn't seen such a beam of light in ages. That flicker faded and he looked broken again. He couldn't pretend to look tough anymore and he began to cry. I took his face in my hands and looked him right in the eyes. I know, I assured him. Us too. We're barely held together too, but if you don't help us out of here right now, there will be so much more to cry about. He knew I was right and shook the pout from his face. Come on, he said, sprinting into action. This way. It was as if he'd been waiting for other escapees to come along to feel brave enough to go further. We had two choices, get to the next town or be murdered. He herded us along endless barbed wire fences and through dense bushes, all equipped with treacherous barbs that snagged the skin no matter which direction you went. He bent gates for us to pass through them. He was the only friend either of us had found in years. Like an animal going off instinct, he steered us through a maze of intimidating scenery. After what felt like days in the expanse of a single night, we finally saw lights indicating the closest small town. He led us right to a tiny brown one-story house. All of us were doused in sweat and would have bet against ourselves if we had to wager the odds of our survival. Arrival at this glorified shack felt like a relief, but also briefly like a very, very bad idea. I decided to trust him. He had told us in the woods, I know a place. We were comforted by his kind face and had no other real choice but to follow him. He scanned the perimeter, then approached a dirty window and communicated some message through a complex knocking pattern. My guts began to turn with some certainty that this was not where we wanted to be, but almost immediately a pair of eyes popped into view behind the window. The moon's glow made them look coppery gold. Our guide proceeded to hold up a bag which he pulled from his pocket, revealing it to the gatekeeper's critical scanning eyes. His reply was to crank open the window and pull us inside one by one. Once again, I knew I wasn't through with being on the run. I asked like a fool what this place was, even though the answer was written all over the window guard's face. This young man, we thought, would make our plan better. He told me matter-of-factly, the guy who lives here is my buddy. He's also a dealer and a rival of Shorty's. Shorty, of course, was the evil force of nature we just barely escaped from, trying like hell to hold on to our survival. The full weight of his words hit me like getting the wind knocked out of you by jumping off the high dive wrong. It didn't take me long to realize we'd run from one captor straight into the clutches of another. I squeezed the skinny girl's hand to communicate to her like a mother would. We had already withstood too much to torture to give up. "Isn't this great?" our idiot guide asked me. I replied simply, "Yup, it's great, all right." Again, I squeezed the girl's hand tight to tell her without words, "We're not done running tonight." The fight was far from over. We'd wait for these dumbasses to doze off, and we'd make a beeline for some place with no maniacal boss around to floss his fucking teeth with us as he pleased. She energetically agreed with me. We weren't free in the least, but we'd bested one horrible beast and knew we could outsmart another. I jolted awake, shaking, my sweat soaked through the covers. So I could talk about this dream for a while. It was really vile and crazy and scary and intense. Did you like the part with the closet? I tried to make it interactive because this is attached to a closet, see? So we're like, you're in the closet. Get out of there! So, you get it. And I pulled out actual Victorian garments and flung them about wildly. And you don't even want to know how the horses survived. So hopefully I'll maybe just release this as 2 videos. I don't know, I'm pretty tired. Wouldn't you be if you were dreaming crazy dreams like that every single night? I mean, that's just a fraction of what I remember, I'm telling you. Like, my brain holds details. Like, the wallpaper color, the dinginess, the chipping fingernail polish on the stupid girl's fingers, the way her feet looked really dirty and I wanted to wash them for her. I mean, I remember everything. It's crazy. And that's just one dream. There's one. Made me want to scream. Sometimes I do wake up screaming from crazy stuff like that, but it was a whole ass world. And I used this incredible quilt that I have as my backdrop because that was kind of part of the plot or part of the ambiance of the thing, of the dream, was that it was this horrible, ugly place, but he had somehow overtaken this home that had all this beautiful decoration and all these wondrous antiquities, and he was just a flea. And so I used mean words like Napoleon complex to describe shortness. Obviously, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to bully short people, but he was like an evil villain. So I had to describe him aptly, appropriately, because sometimes there's no other way to describe a bad guy other than saying what he is. And that's what he was. That's what he looked like. His pimply face coming around the corner. You can see it. Just eating the Spam with his fingers. You don't even want to know how the horses survived. Yeah, it was really scary. Graphic and scary. And things got pretty hairy for old Teal there, but she galloped off with the skinny chick into the distance. And then we met a bunch of other pricks and got into more trouble. And that burst our bubble of getting out of there. And then who knows what happened, because it's a dream, and it's a whole world that you only get to see the scenes you're allowed to see. So that's it for me. And I'll bring you more dreams and scenes and screams and thrills and chills and spills and poems. Thanks for being with me. And I'm glad that I live in my home and not in that terrible place that I faced in my dream. So, small victories. Wear freaky vintage denim. Bring you more soon.